Okay, this is the second video we're trying to do for a Bible class, and I'm glad you could join us tonight. And whenever you're watching this, there will be a study sheet that goes along with this. And hopefully, if you're interested enough, you can look at that and fill out some of the questions or use those as a discussion guide with other people. And so, we want to talk a little bit about change and about some of the things that are going on. And specifically about what we understand, because sometimes it is difficult to understand, and it is especially difficult to understand when it involves change. And so there has been a lot of change lately. And in all this change that's going on, it seems as if we are trying to figure out and trying to understand what has happened in our world. We no longer have the same things, and we're no longer able to go to the same places. We have restricted activity. And anytime there's something new that comes, it's difficult to understand. You see a lot of conflicting reports about what the coronavirus does and about how you catch it and about how it's spread. And so it's difficult sometimes to understand exactly which one of those is true. And so when we're trying to understand all of these things, sometimes we just find ourselves confused. We get used to doing things a certain way. And so that way is familiar. We're used to it that way. And we do it the same way every time. Chances are you have a morning routine. When you get up, you do a certain thing. And when you go to bed, you do those things in reverse order. And so a lot of times we do have this routine that we develop, and it's a habit. And we develop the habit primarily because it's much easier for us to go through the same routine and much shorter, and we don't have to think about it. We know what comes next because all of those things have to be done. And so it's easier to develop a habit or to develop a routine. When we're not able to do that routine, we become confused, and it's much harder for us to think. And it's much harder for us to realize exactly what it is we're doing. And so we have a hard time being able to understand what comes next. Anything unfamiliar is difficult. Those things can be harder for us to know. Some people find it very easy to use tools, and some people don't like tools at all. They would much rather just pay somebody else to come and do it. They don't want to know what it makes it work. They don't know how to fix it. They just want it to work, and so let me hire somebody else to come fix it. Of course, the person who comes to fix it has to be good at fixing things and understanding about tools. Some people are good with relationships. It seems effortless. They're able to talk to other people. They're able to show love and compassion and concern, while some others struggle greatly with this. And they have such a difficult time trying to understand and trying to keep these relationships. When they say something, it ends up being the wrong thing. And so they struggle with relationships much more than they do with using tools. Tools are easy. Tools always do the same thing. But then you never know what people are going to say. And so it's always more difficult when you're talking about relationships. I think the Bible is especially hard to understand. It's a long book. It deals with many different time periods. It does not go in order. It was not written in order. There are multiple writers. They don't write about the same time period. And all the rules change within each of those time periods. And so it becomes difficult for us to keep up with exactly what's going on, who's the major characters, where's the book going. And so a lot of times it ends up saying whatever the people telling us want it to say. And so we don't understand. And that's one of the biggest things that we have to deal with in our faith, is trying to say, I don't understand. In John 6, we read about Jesus doing an amazing miracle. He did it before anyone really understood he was doing it. There had been a great crowd following him, and as this crowd had followed him, they had listened for many days to his teaching. Well, the food that they had brought with them had run out long ago, and so they found themselves without any food. The disciples try to send the crowd away, and they even tell Jesus, let's send them away before we have to do something. Jesus never does like us to avoid the situation. And so he turns to them and says, "You give them something to eat." And of course, they don't know how, they don't understand, they're confused. They say, "Well, we don't have enough money." Isn't that always the way it is? We don't have enough money. Actually, they don't have enough resources. And so he asks, "What do you have? Go and find out." And they find out they have 5 loaves and 2 fish from a small boy. The boy is able to give up his lunch, but that's all they have. And so they understand that we can't do anything. It's hopeless. And Jesus is saying to them, "You don't understand because you don't know who you're talking to." And so he gives them instructions about what they are supposed to do. He tells them to have the people sit down, to put them in groups of 50, to pass out the bread, pass out the fish, and feed the people. It seems very, very simple. They had come because Jesus was doing many miracles on the sick. And that's the reason they were there, is because what he was doing was very unlikely. What he was doing was not understandable, but they believed it because they could see the result. And they could see it immediately. A person who had been blind was able to see. A person who had been lame was able to walk. And so these were amazing things to them. And when we can see the results immediately, it's always part of our understanding. We just accept that it can happen. But sometimes it isn't always easily seen, and we have a harder time then with our understanding. With Jesus feeding the 5,000 men, plus women and children, it was probably between 10 and 20,000. And so he had solved the problem of not having enough. I think that's one of the problems we face today, and especially at this current time. People are worried about things like paper towels and toilet paper. And so they seem to go and buy everything they can so that they will have enough. In this situation, they didn't have enough. The people were hungry, and Jesus is trying to teach them it's not about whether you have enough, it's about whether you believe in me. And if you believe in me, you have enough. Because Jesus solves the problem of having enough. Today, we see aisles that are empty in grocery stores. We see meat counters that are completely empty. They have nothing in them. And so we can't buy more food, and we begin to worry about having enough. It makes me wonder if we understood what Jesus was talking about in this miracle that he does, if we would stop worrying about having enough and more have the concept that we will let God provide. That is what Jesus is trying to say here. Jesus talks about being the bread of life, that he is the bread of life that comes down from heaven. And so he uses the miracle that he had done about feeding all of these people with a very small amount. And then he claims that he is this bread of life. He is the one who would come down and sustain their life. He is the one that they would take and bring them into themselves, and they would see that Jesus is able to fill their life. He is able to sustain them. And he's talking about a spiritual term here. He's not talking about that they would never be hungry again, but a lot of times what makes us hungry and what we are more worried about is not about physical hunger. It's more about our spiritual hunger, this emptiness that we feel inside. And so Jesus is saying, I am the one who solves that. And if I can solve that, I can also solve being able to find something to eat. And so he claims to solve both of those at the same time. And he tries to get them to understand, but the more he tries to get them to understand it, they don't. He's trying to say they need to be involved with him, but they don't understand. And that he is the one that they should follow, and they still don't understand. And he says, it's like I am the one who would sustain your life, like I would be your bread. I would give you what you need to eat, and they still don't get it. And so he tries harder to explain about I'm the bread out of heaven, and they're still not getting it. And you know what it's like when you look at someone and you can tell the blank expression on their face. There's nothing going on. They really don't quite grasp what it is that you're saying. And so he tries harder, and he talks about taking him into their life, that they would perhaps eat his flesh, drink his blood, if they would make him part of themselves. And he's not talking literally, but he's talking about them being able to be part with him. And they don't get it. They really don't understand. And sometimes when we try to get people involved, they just refuse to understand. They don't see how it applies. They don't see how it makes any sense. And if we had the answer for that, I'm sure it would solve many problems. But we don't know how to get people involved, and we don't know how to reach out to them and make them understand why something is critical or important. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not we should quarantine with this virus and everything else, and people are not understanding. Whether it's as extreme as what some are saying or not as extreme, there seems to be a lot of difference in what people believe. And when they get confused, they no longer believe. They had gotten so confused by this point that they decided it wasn't worth it, that they just decided to walk away. In spite of all the miracles they had seen, in spite of all the amazing things that Jesus had done, they decided that, you know what, I don't really understand what he's saying. I don't understand his message. And if I can't understand his message, then I really can't understand what he wants me to do. And so they have given up and they've walked away, and they no longer walk with him. In fact, there's a verse in John 6 and verse 60 that goes like this. When the disciples heard it, they said, "This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it?" But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, said to them, "Do you take offense at this? And what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus knew from the beginning who those were who did not believe and who it was who would betray him. And he said, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." They end up saying, this is a hard saying. Who is able to even listen? And they basically decide they're not able to listen. And so, in spite of the miracles, they walk away. They can't understand. Jesus tries to ask them about these things and ask them about what it is that they understand. And he says, well, what if you saw the Son of Man ascending where he was before? Well, they don't even grasp that. They don't get it. It's a reference to Jacob's ladder. It's a reference to the Son of Man being able to come back, to him being the connection between heaven and earth, and about us being able to pray in his name. But they aren't going to get that because they really don't understand the concept. And he says it's the Spirit that gives life, but they don't understand anything about spirit either, and so they're not going to be able to grasp that. He says his words are spirit and life. And he finally comes to the conclusion that no one can come to me unless it's been granted by the Father. And so he talks about a special understanding that people who try to follow God find, simply because God grants it, not because they are capable on their own of understanding all these things, but because they try with faith, then God is able to open their eyes and they can see and they can understand. And so it isn't about how smart you are. It isn't because you have a great education. It is the fact that you believe. And when we believe in Jesus, whether we understand or not, God is able to reveal this to us. And God is able to show us exactly what he wants us to have and what he wants us to do. And we are able to understand things about Jesus because God opens those things to us. And so what is your level of confusion? Do you understand how to make a video? Well, this is a learning curve for me. You may notice I've got the ear pod in. No, I'm not listening to a game. It's the microphone now that I've tried to figure out how to use. Being able to make a video is a much bigger learning curve than what I knew before. And so I didn't understand that. It's something I've had to learn. You've probably had to learn how to watch the device that you're watching on and how to work it. Smartphones in the last few years have been a lot smarter, and they're able to do a lot more things. And sometimes we have it, and the only thing we do is make calls on it. We don't know how to work the rest of it. We just do one of the basic things, and that's it. But a lot of times we're going to try to figure out other things. We want to chat. We want to see grandchildren. We want to send pictures. We want to be able to do all of those things. Let me suggest to you that it does not matter whether you understand something, you can still believe in it. And so you may believe something works, but you don't understand how it works. For example, your smartphone, you don't understand what's inside of it and how all those things work. But it's just a matter of being able to understand that it does. And that when you send a picture, your grandkids are going to be able to see it, or your kids, or that text message that is so important that someone understands. You believe that they have received it. How does your car work? Well, you get in, you turn the key, and sure enough, it starts, and you put it in drive, and you're able to drive away. And so it works. But how does the engine know to start? It has to connect the starter to the flywheel, to the pistons, which then turns on the electronics, and the spark is delivered at the right time as the compression of the piston comes up. But you don't have to know all of that. All you have to know is, I turned the key and it started. I put it in drive and it goes. You don't understand how the transmission works, but you believe that you are able to operate a car without understanding it. In fact, we do it all the time. And that's what Jesus is trying to tell them. If you'll believe, you may not know all the things about it yet. And it's just so much more to discover. But you're still able to make it work. And there are so many amazing things to God, and so many things that God is able to do. But I think so many times people reject God because they simply don't understand how he could possibly do something. The passage that we read, it talks about a miracle that Jesus did. And people reject him because they don't know how he did it. And they can't understand his teaching. And so they walk away. There are many things we don't understand today. We may not know how to fly a plane, and yet we'll get on the plane and ride. We don't know how it works. The only thing we know how to work is the seatbelt. That's it. And yet we will arrive at our destination exactly where we were supposed to be. We may not understand any equipment that we use. We may not understand how to steer a ship, whether it's a cruise ship or a battleship. We don't know how that. And yet we'll go on a cruise, at least we would, and we will believe that it's going to arrive at our destination and it will bring us back. And we'll completely enjoy the cruise without worrying about it at all. We don't think about what's going on up in the wheelhouse and whether or not it's being directed exactly right. At least I hope you don't. Because we believe that it's possible that someone else is in control. And so, what if we could believe that God is in control of our life? Is that we may know some things about it, and certainly we need to do those things that are going to make it better. And we are going to do things that are going to make it easier, and we do know how to make some things happen. But we don't know everything. We don't understand all our relationships. We don't understand all the things that are going to happen because of what we did yesterday. And yet, we do believe we're going to be able to handle it. And if we had God there to trust in him, and we believe that God is able to help us handle it, what an amazing thing it does is it opens up our life and allows us then to relax in what we do. We don't understand a lot about colors. How do you make green anyway? Or how do you make orange? Or how do you make brown? I think you mix orange and green and then you get the brown. You have to figure out the other two. But as you think about it, there are so many things in this world we don't understand, and yet we will wear clothes that match without even understanding how to make the colors. Maybe it's easier to stick with black and white. I know a lot of men say they don't understand women. They don't know how they work. They don't know how they function. They don't even know what they're saying. And yet they might love them and want to be with them and even marry them. They make life exciting, but you don't understand, and you never will. The point is, you can believe something works without understanding it. And I think that's one of those amazing things. We can believe something works without understanding it. We can believe God works without understanding everything that goes into Him. And yet we know that He is in control of all things and that He is able to make things work. Is it our job to make Christianity user-friendly then? Are we the ones who are supposed to explain how Christianity works and how a person should learn to pray or to fast or to study the Bible? Well, certainly we can explain the things that we know. We can explain the gospel. We can explain the message about Jesus and about how He came to this earth and is the sacrifice for our sins. And if we put our faith in Him and make a covenant by repentance and baptism with Him, that we are able to enjoy the blessings of that covenant. And we are able to say that even without maybe understanding exactly how it all works and how it all happens. We just know that God is real. We just know that God is just and that He is able, because of Jesus, to make all of those things possible. And so we can explain parts of a Savior, and yet we don't have the whole story. So do we have to make it user-friendly? You just have to explain enough where people can believe and share the fact that you believe. Can you share your doubt? Well, sure, because other people are going to have doubt. You can say, I know this part, but I don't know this part. And so we believe because we know this one part, but we may not know the next one. We'll find out. We'll do more research. We'll do more study. And then we come to an even greater understanding of who God is and of what God does. We see this in the time when Jesus had done this miracle back in John 6. The disciples had come to Him, and Jesus is wondering what it is He's going to do. He sees people walking away from Him because they don't understand. And so He begins to ask the disciples what they believe. The passage goes like this. John chapter 6 and verse 66. After this, many of His disciples turned back and no longer walked with Him. So Jesus said to the 12, Do you want to go away as well? And Simon Peter had answered Him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Jesus answered them, Did I not choose you, the 12, and yet one of you is a devil? He spoke of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray Him. And so some of the people walk away. They no longer follow. And Jesus begins to wonder, what about His other disciples? Is everyone going to walk away simply because they don't understand it all? So He asked His disciples, Are you going to go away as well? The disciples answer Him with what they do understand. They say, We know you are the Holy One of God. Basically, we know there aren't any answers anywhere else. We know you're the only source, and we know you're the one who has the answers we need, whether we understand them all or not. And so they're not going to leave. They're going to stay with Jesus because they do believe in the part that they know. They may not have all the solution, but they believe what they do know about Jesus. And that is that He is Lord of heaven and earth. He is the Holy One of God. He is the one who's able to do these amazing miracles, that He is the one who loves them and cares for them. And so whatever it takes, and they do not understand the whole plan at this time, they are going to follow Him. And I think that's where we come to in our decision as well. that whatever it takes, we are going to follow him. And it doesn't matter whether it's a coronavirus, or it doesn't matter whether it's other things in our world that come in and confuse us so that we don't understand. We just know one thing. We know Jesus is the Holy One of God, and we believe in him. And even if everything else in our life gets turned upside down, we do believe in Jesus and what Jesus is able to do. And so I want to ask you, what's the point where you would give up? Because actually, it's true that a lot of people have given up on church and even given up on God. Some of them claim not to give up on God, but still they gave up on church. Well, you see, Jesus is the head of his church. And what we're doing is trying to say, I don't understand. I'm going to pick and choose different parts. I think it's important for us to know that if we believe in Jesus, we're going to accept whatever Jesus wants. And while it may be difficult at times for us to see and understand exactly what Jesus is trying to accomplish, we're still going to believe in him and we're going to follow him. Those same disciples would follow Jesus all the way through his time where he was most popular and the time where people flocked to him. And they would follow him through times like we just read about, where people give up, where people walk away, where the church attendance drops and falls off drastically, and people say, I don't get it, I'm not coming anymore. Yes, Jesus had that as well. It wasn't just in our time. But many people don't believe, and so don't know how to follow. The point is that Jesus is the Holy One of God, that he is able to take charge of our life, that he is able to be enough, that he is able to make whatever needs to be done in our life happen. And so we understand Jesus is in control and that he is the one that we follow. And so we are not afraid of change anymore. We're just trying to see how it fits with Jesus. When's the last time you studied Revelation or Ezekiel or the end of Daniel? Well, some of those books are pretty hard to understand. But let me just say, start with Jesus. Understand exactly what Jesus says. Understand that part of it. And maybe then you'll go on to books of Revelation or Ezekiel. And maybe those will make sense as well. We gained a little bit more each time. Every year, I hope you learn some more things that you didn't know before. It's just part of life. And God knows that. And God reveals to us the things he wants us to know. Most of that comes from reading our Bible. And so we're able to do that. And we're able to see how God is able to reveal things to us and show us things that are truly his. And so I hope that you're doing that. There's a few questions on the study sheet I want you to be able to think about. And so think about some times when you least understand and maybe just want to walk away and give up. Or maybe you don't want to walk away and give up on God. That it's a matter of how can I be involved? We see Jesus' frustration as he tried to convince them how to be involved. And the illustration didn't go well. I don't know that we can ever really say that about Jesus, that he picked an illustration that didn't work, but it didn't work. And so what would it take to convince you? What would it take for you to believe? What do you know? What do you believe about God today? What do you think he wants you to do? Those are just some of the questions. Let's ask a lot more. And please share this with somebody else so that you're able to question them and talk with them about what it means to really believe. Whether you understand or not, we can still believe and we can still be close to God. Thank you for watching this today.